Let me tell you just a few things, and I'm going to race to keep us right on schedule for today. So, Metropolitan Interdenominational Church. I always like to think about what we do in terms of doing ministry, prophetic ministry in the 21st century. And what that means for us is that it means trying to understand how the prophetic voice needs to be brought to bear in relationship to this issue of fighting HIV/AIDS. This is our brand, this is our logo, it's on everything that we do, it's in front of you, I pray for you to carry it with you. If you look closely, you'll see that embedded in the beautiful artistic work that was done by Reverend David Cassidy many years ago, one of our associates, is simply the word whosoever. And even though there's much in here that's symbolic of the faith tradition which we use as the basis, primary basis of that which we do in Metropolitan Church, we do see ourselves as being a congregation that's radically inclusive. We talk about ourselves as being a congregation that's inclusive of all, alienating to none, leading the way to spiritual growth by sharing God's love with the world. That's it. We think that's big enough to include everyone. We don't get bogged down in the ways in which people have come to experience deity in their lives, the ways in which they've come to know higher power, the ways in which they've come to know God. We don't even get too bogged down about the names that you use. We tend to lean toward Jesus, but if for you it is Buddha, if it is Allah, and if it is Elohim, if it is Jehovah, you go down the list. I think there's a way in which what we see in this word, whosoever, is truly that, whosoever. I always remember the great words that I heard once from Gardner C. Taylor, who said that ever since the Declaration of Independence was written, and it said that all men and women were created equal, that there's been somebody trying to file exception, except Native American, except, I feel that way about this word whosoever. There are clearly people who are always trying to file exception, but there are no exceptions, that all are included, and we work very hard at trying to figure out how to make sure alienating none. But beyond that, and you might say, how do you get beyond that? I'll tell you what I think is beyond that for us here today and for the work that we'll be doing together, hopefully for the next few months. I think that the posture in the picture is more important than anything for us. Because indeed, I know that when you see that image of outstretched hands, those who are within the position instantly think of crucifixion and resurrection and all that that represents. But I want to suggest to you there's something that I'm convinced this person, this individual who we focus on and refer to in the name of Jesus, was pushing all of us to do something that we too often do not do, and that is to stretch. Yes. And what we're going to be doing together for the next few months is some stretching. Because very often what happens is that we have become so limited, and we have ways in which we talk about what that means to stretch. But the one theme that I would suggest to you, that I know we will come up against over and over again, is this stumbling block that in too many instances has happened within our faith traditions. And that is that we've become so bogged down in telling people what to think about the issues and about the various realities that we encounter in life. And what we're going to be spending some time doing in these next months together is to deal with perhaps how to think beyond the limitations that we too often find ourselves placing upon ourselves. Sometimes there are doctrinal limitations, sometimes there are theological limitations, sometimes there are philosophical limitations, sometimes there are social standard ideas, the ways of knowing that are too limiting. In order to fulfill that vision that your friend who you met on that street corner, who talked to you about how HIV/AIDS can really be a part of, I always say, the thing that could be the transforming, saving experience of our time, is understanding that. But you have to stretch. Because you come to those places where you hit the wall because of something that you've been told and that you've become so dogmatically committed to that you cannot open your mind to see beyond that. Think of where we would be today if people stayed stuck in places of understanding and belief that existed in the past. There were those who didn't believe that this day could ever come. There are those who could believe. Anybody ought to be shouting about that today. They ought to be shouting about it as of the events of 9 days ago. People who just did not believe. And some of us still find it hard to believe. Some of us still find it hard to believe. So there's a way in which this business of understanding, as we need to bring it to bear in is going to continue to require of us that we stretch. So you'll often see that when I'm doing presentations, even when I am talking about whatever the slide might be before you, I always keep that image at the top, because I do believe in my heart that there's something that represents the energy, there's something that represents the power, there's something that represents that indescribable thing that goes beyond reason and logic, that is captured in that word whosoever, that influences everything I have to say. Because ultimately that's what we're trying to do, is understand how we do this. You have before you, which really we decided to use as your really as your packet for today, the outline of the program that we have come to share with you. Let me just start off by telling you that we've learned, we've been doing this now for 12 years. When we first started doing capacity building work, we did it in a way that is probably what's most familiar to you, and that is that very often the way in which we did capacity building early on was that we went around the country. We actually have done this work in 23 states in the United States, but we actually went around doing these one-day events, a summit, a conference. You know the names. You've had them here. You've experienced them in other places. You know how we go in and we are involved in information dissemination. We're involved in training and development in a way that allows people to perhaps begin to become excited or even be energized, encouraged in terms of doing the work that we do. What we discovered about 5 years ago was that that was all well and good, and we don't in any way dismiss the significance of the work that we did in in that format. But we realized that the issue of sustainability was one that we were not achieving to the degree that we would desire. It's not to say that it did not translate in some instances into having that kind of impact that left a sustainable mark on the work we've done. But we had to be more intentional about making it happen. So we convinced the Centers for Disease Control to allow us to begin to use this model where we go into communities and stay for at least 6 months, 5 months of the program, and then months beyond that. We've discovered how important it is to go into a city. I actually have been coming back and forth to Oakland now for the last 5 or 6 months. I know my way around Oakland now. When I picked up Dr. Forbes at midnight last night and there was an accident on the interstate, I got off and drove through the city. And I understood how to get out. I've been in Oakland enough that I know my way around Oakland quite well. But we've discovered, and I've come to know most of your faces in this room, because we've discovered that the work doesn't happen as it needs to happen if indeed you don't go into a city and really be intentional about understanding what's going on, not to come with any predisposition with regard to how things are being done, but rather go and discover and see for yourself. I should tell you right now, I'm excited about what I see going on in Oakland, because there are numerous efforts, and I should include the West Bay as well, because some of you are from the West Bay, and I think there's been evidence of clear collaboration. But what we also have seen, and I think you understand this, is that if we could somehow weave together, if we could somehow create the mosaic where all of these energies were singularly focused, where there was a greater level of collaboration, we probably could have a greater level of impact in terms of our fight against this disease. And I think there's also the appreciation that every organization I've talked to, every community-based organization, every service organization that I have had interactions with, every one of you talk about having a faith initiative, having some point in which you have determined that working with the faith community was an integral part of successfully doing that which you were trying to achieve. And what we realized in that is at the same time everyone said that, it's kind of like the way church works anyhow. You know, you've got your preacher over here in your church, you've got your preacher in your church over here that you work with, but there's a way in which we need to bring all those energies together. And I hope what will happen in these next months that we're together is that we'll figure out how to bring those energies together in a way that will allow the impact to be greater. The other thing that is important to us in this process is making sure that, and by the way, as you take time and read through this brochure, everything I'm saying to you is pretty much captured there. So I'm not doing the slides right now in that regard. But what you will appreciate is that the way this has been designed is to make sure that we bring insight, that we bring bring perspective, that we bring new ways of thinking to the table. So that as we interact with the faith community, and as we ourselves, who might not be clergy, not necessarily people who wear their collars backwards and, stand in pulpits on Sundays and other days of worship and proclaim what we believe to be the truth with regard to the great and complex and wondrous issues of the world and the times in which we live. Irrespective of that, we're clear that all of us are a part of this experience that we call a faith walk, because all of us are spiritual beings. I tell people all the time, we're at least three-dimensional beings. We're physical, we're mental, and we're spiritual. And your spirituality does not have to be reflected in religious terms for you to be spiritual. Most of us do end up acting out, living out who we are as spiritual beings within some religious context. But all of us believe. And one of the things that has become problematic in our communities is that far too often dysfunctional belief systems have upstaged that which is liberating, transforming, and hope-driven. And consequently, instead of uplifting, can very often be restricting, restraining, and limiting. So we're talking about how we become the forces of liberation in a fashion that go beyond the ordinary. And I think you have to have that if you're going to deal with this issue of HIV/AIDS effectively. Now I'm going to take my last 5 minutes and introduce you to a concept. And I should tell you, this concept is one that it's not one that is the byproduct of our work. It's not exclusive. Some of you that have done work in the social sciences, the psychosocial arena, are familiar with this idea of communication for social change. It's a model that was developed a number of years ago as a direct byproduct of an effort that was, I guess, guided by the academic community at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. If you saw the video earlier, you noticed the woman who was really who led that president. It was not very easy for you to hear, but you saw the face of a woman who has made her transition and gone on to glory now, Jackie Fleming Hampton. And Jackie Fleming Hampton is the person who first introduced, she had the job that Terry now has at MICTAN. And she's the woman who first introduced this particular concept. We then probably wove into it some things that we thought were unique and peculiar to what our understandings had come to be with regard to how you bring the faith community into the arena of involvement around responding to HIV/AIDS. But there are a couple of words, and then I'm going to get to the end of this. One word that you're going to hear us use an awful lot is the word conversation. I am just thrilled by the fact that the people at CDC, the people at the HIV Vaccine Trial Network, and especially the work that goes under the umbrella of Legacy, have been willing to buy in with us to this idea that there has to be a new conversation that transpires at a level beyond which we've ever gone before, if we're ever going to bring together the energies of those who are in the different arenas that are associated with agencies, programs, and initiatives that are designed to address HIV/AIDS. We are very clear that we don't see ourselves as valuing any one greater than the other, but appreciating that all of them are very much dependent upon there being a level of trust, there being a degree of rapport, that there is somehow the establishment and development of relationships that allow people to communicate on a level that gets us beyond the superficiality, that gets us beyond the stuff that too easily fragments and divides, to get beyond the things that for too long have allowed us to think that we cannot talk in a fashion that is mutually beneficial. The conversation is what we're about creating. And like I said, I'll be forever indebted to CDC for buying into the idea that these conversations need to happen. And you're a part of helping to make these conversations happen across the country. If you look also at the back of that brochure that you have, you will see where we've been trying to facilitate these conversations in cities across the country. The one that by far we look at as being probably most successful for us right now is the experience that we've had in Rochester, New York. But that's not to say that the experiences in Houston and the experience in Chicago and South Carolina and Memphis have not also been very important. we think that Oakland is going to be over the top. And it has a lot to do with what Kabir said to you earlier about this collaboration that we decided in the hallway of the Marriott Hotel in New Orleans, Louisiana, in January. And you know, y'all, when things happen and you know it's right, I had been looking for him. They told me what he looked like, and I actually we were both taking advantage of skirting out of a back door to find our way probably to the facility and ran right smack into each other. And we started talking about this. But what I would suggest to you has happened since then is that what we see in Oakland, and what you're doing today, by the way, we've learned as we've gone along. I mean, believe me, Memphis was not like Rochester, Rochester was not like. So we know how important it is that you are involved in this process. And what the Alameda County Health Department has brought to the table that is so important was, Kabir said, look, we've got a few dollars that we can contribute to this. We have never done a pre-launch. What we've done in the other cities is we've gone in and done due diligence and done our work to learn the community. And then we would have probably ended up inviting most of you to be a part of a leadership team. And that leadership team has meetings on a weekly basis. We do it by simply conference call to talk about how we orchestrate and work our way through this series that we're going to suggest and ask you to be a part of beginning in January. Because of this pre-conference, this pre-launch, what this means is we now have a chance to come together before we begin to have those conversations via the conference calls. And one of the goals today, just so you know, there's nothing up our sleeve. Before you leave here today, we're going to ask you to buy in. You know, you've already seen, there's a little card in here, all right? A little commitment card. And we're going to ask you to buy into the process. But you see why it's important as I share with you just 2 or 3 things that's in this presentation. It is about transformation. It's more than information dissemination, okay? It's more than it's about transformation. The history of this is rooted in the guiding philosophy of communication for social change. It's really traced back to the work of Prophet Farah. You all know that work to some degree. Most of you all know. Yes. Most of you all know the book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Yes. And there's a way in which he speaks to these things of having to deal with how it is in relationship to purpose and cultural identity, building trust, commitment, and ownership. A part of doing it this way is that we want you to be involved in this evolution in a way that allows you to walk away having some ownership in it. The history, and these are 2 of the quotes I love from his work. It says transformation is only valid if it is carried out with people and not for them. Yeah. And it's a matter of getting you to be involved with us in doing this. And then liberation is like childbirth and a painful one. The person who emerges is a new person, and no longer oppressor or oppressed, but a person in the process of achieving freedom. It is only the oppressed who, by freeing themselves, can free their oppressors. We're talking about the thing that Kabir was hitting on earlier. We believe that the whole experience together can be transformative in terms of how we do things. When a village or group uses the communication for social change process to address the critical issues, they have already affected positive outcomes. Just coming together begins the process of affecting positive outcomes. And then the communication for social change process is as important as the outcome. The fact that we go through this together, that we come to know each other, that we come to have the bonded relationships and the kind of appreciation for each other ends up being perhaps as important as anything that we'll do. And then also the communication for social change model focuses on the process by which dialogue as a participatory form of communication is related to collective action. I don't want you to come to this table, and we're going to be at this table together for a few months, and become impatient. This happens all the time. I guarantee you've seen it. You didn't get my full bio, but if you read my full bio, there's a line that I took out of it for this purpose, and that is that in 1992, I ran for governor of the state of Tennessee. We came in 3rd out of a field of 14. But running for governor was a byproduct of impatience. We had a clergy group that had worked very hard on developing a model by which we were working. It was called about our health. It was a model that was determined to impact health. But impatience made somebody say one day at a meeting that I was not attending, and tell you about not showing up at a meeting, that I should be the candidate for governor for the state of Tennessee. But we were impatient because we kept saying, we got to do something, we got to do something, we got to do something. Sometimes we rush to the point of saying we got to do something without really understanding how we can do it together. But this means that, it does end up in collective action. And I should tell you that as we go through this, we will share with you this whole model of communication for social change. When you see the diagram of the dynamic of the work, it is almost mind-boggling. But let me just tell you this much about it right now so you will appreciate it. And then when you see it, you won't be overwhelmed by it. The communication for social change model was developed by some people who realized that there was change happening in communities like that which most of us represent that would be disproportionately impacted by all kinds of negative forces. But they realized that change was happening. So I'm telling you, where we are right now today is a result of systematic change that's happened over time. What they did was, they said, there's something going on here, but no one has seemingly taken time to understand how it is that this continues to systematically happen. Whether it be tearing down the walls of desegregation in public schools, whether it be people who now are raising questions about mass incarceration and the adverse impact it's having upon us, as well as the ways in which it is also a contributing factor to infectious disease, particularly HIV and AIDS. You understand what I'm talking about? They realize that change is happening in these communities, but no one could sit back and say it's happening like this, right? So I want to say, what they did is they went into the city of Baltimore. They took anthropologists, who are basically ethnographers, and just sat down and said, let's just observe what these people are doing and see if we can then model that in a way that says, if you do it this way. And it has all kinds of ways of compensating for the stuff that we run into, all the way down to the breakdown in interpersonal relations, the kinds of petty jealousies, territorialism, and all this. I can be for real, right? Yeah. You all know why it doesn't happen, right? We've become very territorial about how we deal with our issues. It becomes divisive because of all of those things that have been so deeply embedded in our consciousness that undermines our ability sometimes to realize the full potential that's locked up within us. We're talking about how you release that potential. And people see it happening, but we're talking about how maybe in a conversation get the way we do it more effectively. And then the next slide is that sustainability of social change is more likely if the individuals and communities most affected own the process and content of communication. So what we're saying is that we're trying to start this today where, as we go forward, you'll own it. It's not just about something that some folks from Nashville, Tennessee brought up to the Bay Area and said, here, do this. But rather, we hope that the conversation will unfold such that there will be a level of ownership, because the model is built around sustainability. I made the mistake in Rochester, and I'll never do it again, of when we left Rochester. I actually went to Rochester every month for 2 years. As much as I like Oakland, I really don't plan to come here every month. Because there's a way in which you're owning it means that it goes on without me or any other individual being necessarily present for it to happen. So we want to make sure we shape that, all right? And I haven't counted slides. Okay, new issues should be empowering horizontally, over against, a lot of times it's the hierarchical, up-down thing, so empowering horizontally. Give a voice, go back one, I'm sorry, give a voice to the previously unheard members of the community. There's so many people in our communities who are being adversely affected by this disease who have no voice. And I'm going to call his name and he's going to walk in the door. But y'all know y'all got one person in this community who is dogmatic about the fact of people who are being most disproportionately affected not having a voice. And he takes liberty all the time. His daughter's here, so you tell him I said he takes liberty of disrupting every meeting he goes to and saying, the right people are not here. All right? And we want to make sure the right people are here in the conversation. Y'all heard y'all enjoy hearing that from me better than you enjoy hearing it from Roosevelt, I know. but you know what I'm saying. I mean, that's legitimate.
Yeah.
It's legitimate.
And here he comes.
Yeah. But if I ever heard anybody say this over and over again, give a voice to the previously unheard. We talked about MSM at some point, MSM has to be heard. If we're talking about women who are disenfranchised, oppressed, and abused, then those voices have to be heard.
That's right.
It's not enough for those of us who stand in the pulpits to be
That's
saved.
right. That's
It gets to be important for them to be involved in the conversation, in the community, and unheard members of the community, and be biased toward local content and ownership. So we are biased towards local content and ownership. Communities should be the agents of their own change.
That's right.
And what we're trying to do is create the conversation. We're just trying to create the conversation to allow this to happen. That's what we're here for. That's what I pray you'll appreciate. You're going to hear some voices today that I think will give you a glimpse of some of the distinguished lecturers and distinguished preachers. I did not know that Kabir was going to end up being one of those distinguished preachers this morning.
Yeah.
But, they say, give him the pulpit, give him the microphone. I got a friend who always said, don't relinquish the microphone. Be sure who you give the microphone to, right? I'm coming to where I trust Kabir enough. I knew I could give him the microphone, but I didn't know he was going to preach. But he took the text. Did y'all get the text? That's right. I know there's some biblical story that fits that moment in the water. And by the time I hear it next time, I will say, you know how it works by Kabir. The first time I say I got it from Kabir. The second time I say, I got it from somebody I know. And the third time is I once heard. The fourth time is mine, all right? So if you look up and see it on a video somewhere, you'll say, hey, I said that. But anyway, but it is about this, you all. And I'm convinced we can do this. I mean, I think Oakland is just so right for the moment. And I hope that all of you will lend your time, your talent, and your treasure to